Welcome in, everyone. I am your host, and I want to welcome you to another deep dive.
And I'm thrilled to be here as your resident expert for this one. We have a really incredible topic today.
We really do. So if I say the word vaporwave, I mean, you likely already have a highly specific image flashing in your mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. You know the exact aesthetic. It's a classical white marble Roman bust, just sort of floating in the middle of a clunky, old-school Windows 95 computer desktop.
Yeah, with those vibrant neon pink and cyan lights.
Exactly. Some pixelated Japanese text in the corner, and playing in the background is this perfectly smooth 1980s mall soft pop song that's been slowed down until it sounds like, well, like a ghost trying to sing to you from underwater.
It is an immediately recognizable mood.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people who grew up deeply embedded in internet culture, it's a sound they know inherently, even if they can't quite articulate the mechanics behind it.
But as iconic as that aesthetic is, today we are using an incredible column from MMR titled A Complete History of the Vaporwave Cultural Sphere to really strip away the neon. We want to look at the actual acoustic science and the post-capitalist theory driving this whole thing. Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to go far beyond the internet memes.
Right.
We are diving into the exact sonic formulas, the pivotal record labels that shape the landscape, and the surprisingly deep psychological concepts holding this entire movement together.
I am so glad we are taking this approach. What's fascinating here is that Vaporwave, which really started finding its footing around 2010, is absolutely not a joke.
No, not at all.
It isn't just some niche corner of internet music or a funny background playlist.
Mhm.
When you look at its roots, according to the source, it is a comprehensive art form born from a very specific post-financial crisis era. It's this incredibly dense cultural apparatus where early internet culture, raw human emotion, and discarded images of the past violently intersect.
And to really understand that intersection, we have to travel back to the late 2000s. The cultural soup that birthed this genre was entirely digital. We are talking about late 2000s blog culture. You had Tumblr users obsessively hoarding, recontextualizing, and curating aesthetic images.
Which was huge.
Yeah, and crucially, you had the dawn of the YouTube algorithm era.
That YouTube algorithm is a massive piece of the puzzle. Suddenly, obscure 1980s Japanese city pop, forgotten corporate training videos, and local weather channel forecasts were being archived and served back to a new generation. We were suddenly drowning in digital memories that didn't actually belong to us.
And out of that digital soup comes a pioneer project called Echo Jams, created by the artist One-O-Trix Point Never. The project took existing bright pop songs and just completely abused them with excessive slowdowns.
And we have to look at why that excessive slowdown matters on a theoretical level. It wasn't just a producer saying, hey, playing this at half speed sounds cool. It's actually a method to, quite literally, destroy real time.
Destroying real time, that is such a heavy way to frame it.
But it's true. Think about the source material. When you take a bright, peppy pop symbol from the 1980s, a song meant to make you dance, and you stretch it out, hold it, and loop it relentlessly, you strip away its original context. It stops being a fun dance track and becomes a completely new emotional device.
It becomes haunting.
Exactly haunting. You are trapping a fleeting moment of consumer joy and freezing it in amber.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The MMR column breaks down the literal acoustic structure of that haunting sound, because it turns out to not be random at all. The source outlines an exact sonic formula to making you feel this specific way, based on 4 core principles.
Attenuation, elongation, degradation, and repetition.
Right. Let's break those down, starting with the pitch. There is actually a magic number for that classic vaporwave drag. The signature pitch shift is almost always exactly -20% to -35%.
Which is wild.
Wait, so shifting the pitch down by exactly 20 to 35% isn't just an arbitrary choice?
Far from it. It's a very deliberate mathematical choice to achieve that specific dragging, narcotic feel without making the audio completely unrecognizable. You still need to recognize the ghost of the original pop song. If you go too slow, it just becomes drone music. That 20 to 35% pocket is where the uncanny valley lives for audio.
The column also mentions how they manipulate the frequencies. It's not just a flat slowdown. How exactly are they tweaking the audio spectrum to make us feel like we're wandering through an empty shopping center?
It's a brilliant manipulation of the equalization. If you look at the audio spectrum of a classic vaporwave track, the producers deliberately make the low frequencies cloudy and muffled. By taking the punch out of the bass, they mimic the soft, echoing acoustics of a massive, tiled indoor shopping mall.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Then they move to the mid-range frequencies and actually boost them to highlight the artificial brightness of commercial voiceovers or saxophone solos. It enhances that sickly sweet corporate cheerfulness. And finally, the high frequencies are absolutely dominated by artificial noise.
Like the hiss of a VHS tape.
Exactly. Or the static hum of an old CRT television monitor. Which brings up the production methods. We live in an era of crisp, flawless, lossless digital audio. To get that vaporwave sound, producers have to actively damage pristine files to rebuild what the column calls lost materiality.
So how are they physically engineering that decay?
They use a mix of old hardware and new software. Many use textures from hardware samplers like the SP404, which is a legendary piece of gear in hip-hop and electronic music, known for its gritty lo-fi effects. They use extreme time-stretching features in basic, accessible software like Audacity.
Yeah, Audacity was everywhere back then.
Right, but some of the most dedicated producers will actually run their flawless digital audio through physical decaying VHS hardware. They record it onto a cheap tape just to get that natural, unpredictable degradation and then pull it back into a modern digital audio workstation to aggressively cut equalizers and suppress compression.
It's the meticulous crafting of a sonic ruin. We've established how these producers are literally engineering the sound of decay. But who was actually putting this damaged audio out into the world and organizing it into a movement? The column highlights 4 pivotal record labels that really shape the different flavors of the genre.
The Big Four, as they are known in this space. And they are crucial because they evolved the sound from a singular internet joke into a sprawling musical universe.
The first one the source mentions is Beer on the Rug. This is the foundational label. If there's a blueprint for the entire movement, this is it. This was the home of classic vaporwave and birthed absolute legends of the genre, most notably Macintosh Plus.
Beer on the Rug established that core aesthetic of slowing down 80s R&B, applying that heavy echo, and slapping a strange corporate or technological title on it. They cemented the lost materiality we just talked about, but vaporwave couldn't just stay in that one lane forever.
Right, which leads to the second label, Constellation Tatsu. So if Beer on the Rug is the blueprint, how did Constellation Tatsu pivot away from that classic sound?
They took things in a decidedly more ambient direction. The source notes that they leaned heavily into analog tape culture. In fact, the physical cassette tape became the ultimate artifact for this label because a cassette naturally degrades every time you play it. They also brought an almost spiritual, meditative aesthetic to the movement. It was less about critiquing a 1980s shopping mall and more about finding a weird digital zen.
Then there's the third label, Dream Catalog, which has such a distinctly different vibe. The source says they focus heavily on reconstructing Chinese and Japanese imagery, building these sprawling sci-fi futures, and leaning into an urban ghostliness.
Urban ghostliness is the perfect term. If classic vaporwave feels like being locked inside an abandoned American shopping mall in 1993, Dream Catalog feels like wandering through a neon-lit, rain-soaked Neo-Tokyo in the year 2040, where everyone has mysteriously vanished. It's incredibly cinematic. It shifted the focus from consumerism to a sense of deep isolation in a hyper-dense, futuristic city.
And finally, rounding out the big four, there's Orange Milk Records. They really pushed the boundaries of what this music could even be. The column notes they expanded the experimental electronic possibilities post-vaporwave, and they are legendary for their totally unique, surreal visual art. They moved away from the marble busts and the pink neon into these bizarre, grotesque digital 3D renders that challenge the listener even before they press play.
What I really appreciate about this MMR column is how it maps out the subgenres that grew from these labels. And the defining metric for how a subgenre feels isn't just the instruments used or the samples chosen, it's the speed.
The tempo.
Yes, the BPM, the beats per minute, entirely dictates the aesthetic reality you are placed in.
Let's actually walk through that BPM map because it is wild how simply changing the tempo completely alters the psychological effect. At the very bottom, the slowest of the slow, we have the origin point echo jams sitting at 55 to 70 BPM.
It is practically glacial. At 55 BPM, you are listening to audio that feels like it's being dragged through molasses. It requires patience.
But then you speed up just a bit to classic vaporwave, which sits in that 70 to 90 BPM pocket. And the source points out something incredible about this specific tempo. This is the literal speed of 1980s and 90s advertising music.
It is the tempo of Nuzek. It's the speed designed by corporate psychologists to make you feel relaxed, receptive, and ready to consume. It mimics the resting human heartbeat, keeping you calm as you browse the aisles. By co-opting that exact 70 to 90 BPM range, classic vaporwave is directly hacking into the psychology of consumerism.
From there, the BPM map starts to get really weird. You have mall soft, where the BPM is actually ambiguous. The beat kind of dissolves entirely into environmental sounds.
Mallsoft is a fascinating offshoot. The producers blend the slowed-down music with the echo of footsteps, the hum of fluorescent lights, or the trickle of an indoor water fountain. The tempo was ambiguous because the goal isn't to make a song. The goal is to recreate the spatial audio experience of wandering completely alone through a dead, abandoned commercial space.
But what if you want to dance? The map jumps up to 110 to 130 BPM, which is where future funk lives.
Future funk connects directly to traditional house and dance music. It takes those same retro 80s samples, especially Japanese city pop, but instead of dragging them through molasses, it speeds them up and adds a heavy dance kick. It highlights both the intoxicating sweetness and the profound irony of our consumer culture. It's club-ready, but it still carries that layer of synthetic nostalgia.
Parallel to that dance energy, you have a subgenre called utopian virtual. The source describes this as exploring the total collapse of clean, artificial, corporate utopias.
Think of utopian virtual as the sinister hold music for a futuristic corporation that is probably poisoning the planet. It's incredibly sterile, utilizing high-definition MIDI sounds. It sounds like a pristine corporate presentation for a future that is entirely hollow.
And finally, if you push the tempo all the way up to 150 to 190 BPM, you hit the absolute extreme of the map hard vapor.
Hard vapor is an aggressive rejection of everything we just talked about. It draws heavily from gabber, which, for those who aren't familiar with the 90s Dutch rave scene, is this incredibly fast, aggressive, kick drum-heavy style of techno. If classic vaporwave is the nostalgic, pink-hued dream of the 90s, hard vapor is the industrial nightmare of the future. It presents a world that is totally decadent and inherently destructive. It is heavy, chaotic, and completely devoid of the soothing corporate warmth found in the slower tempos.
So we have all these tempos, from glacial 50 BPM tape loops to 190 BPM industrial nightmares. But I want to bring you back to the visuals we mentioned earlier, the classical statues, the pixelated palm trees, the old user interfaces. Why these specific symbols? And according to the source, why is there such a heavy use of Japanese text in almost all vaporwave art?
That is a crucial part of the puzzle, and it has everything to do with global perception in the 1980s and 1990s. During that era, Japan was viewed globally as the ultimate, unstoppable technological powerhouse. When people in the West pictured the future, they pictured Tokyo. They pictured neon lights, microchips, video games, the Sony Walkman. Japan was the literal symbol of the future. So in Vaporwave, those Japanese characters and corporate logos are taken and distorted.
They are repurposed as ghosts of unfulfilled futures.
Precisely. They represent a shiny techno-utopian tomorrow that was promised to us through relentless advertising, but never actually arrived.
So what does this all mean? We have the mathematically slowed down audio, the dead malls, the ghosts of 1990s Japanese tech. How does this impact the people actually listening to it? Because the primary audience for this genre over the last decade has overwhelmingly been Generation Z.
And that is the psychological crux of this entire deep dive. The column introduces a concept called synthetic nostalgia. This is a profoundly unique emotion born entirely of the internet age. We have a generation of listeners who are feeling a deep, physical, visceral yearning for an era they never actually lived through.
It's incredible. Missing a place you've never been.
Exactly. Think about how people use vintage film filters on their smartphones today. You can take a crystal clear digital photo in 2024, slap a filter on it, and make it look like it was taken on a dusty Polaroid camera in 1978. Vaporwave is doing that, but with the entire cultural psychology of a generation. You have kids born in 2005 feeling genuinely homesick for the feeling of renting a VHS tape from a brightly lit blockbuster video in 1996. The internet archived all those fragmented commercial feelings, synthesized them, and now transmits them to a generation that missed the actual experience but inherited the emotional resonance.
It makes complete sense when you frame it that way. The internet is acting as a prosthetic memory for a time before it took over our lives.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains the core philosophy of Vaporwave, which the author of the MMR column defines as criticism and pleasure. Vaporwave is built on aesthetic ambivalence. It is highly contradictory by nature.
I think a lot of people struggle with that contradiction. How can it be both criticism and pleasure at the exact same time?
It's that weird feeling of knowing a massive corporate shopping mall is designed by psychologists to trick you into spending money, but still finding the smell of the food court and the echoing music, incredibly comforting. On one hand, the music is heavily critiquing capitalist consumer society. It's pointing out how hollow the malls are, how fake the advertising is, and how empty the corporate promises of the 90s were. But on the other hand, it is simultaneously indulging in the sweet, soothing, hypnotic pleasures of that exact same consumerism.
You're critiquing the artificiality, but you still want to take a nap in it.
That's a great way to put it. It is mocking the smooth jazz of the shopping mall while fully acknowledging that the smooth jazz actually sounds incredible. You are tearing down the artificial utopia while actively wrapping yourself up in it like a warm blanket.
It's the ultimate love-hate relationship with capitalism. You're swimming in the very thing you're protesting. This really brings us to how we wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this phenomenon. Looking back at our journey today, from the math of the audio frequencies to the tempo maps, it's clear how Vaporwave entirely transcended being just a minor internet music genre. It became a massive cultural apparatus, it influenced modern graphic design, it dictated a whole era of meme culture, and it essentially laid the groundwork for the massive nostalgia industry we see dominating media and entertainment today.
The author of our source document beautifully summarizes the three driving forces, the three distinct cores of this entire movement. Number one is the lost future. The bright, shiny 90s techno-utopia that we were promised in commercials never happened, and its ghost just lingers in our culture. Number two is synthetic nostalgia, that incredibly potent internet-era emotion of mourning and missing a time you never even got to experience. And number three is aesthetic ambivalence, that purely postmodern contradiction of destroying and praising consumerism in the exact same breath.
Which leads to the column's ultimate final definition of the genre. I'd love for you to read how the source perfectly caps this off.
The author states, Vaporwave is the comprehensive art of the post-capitalist era, where the internet generation re-edits fragmented symbols to visualize both the pain of the lost future and the pleasure of consumer society.
The pain of the lost future and the pleasure of consumer society. It perfectly captures that push and pull. But, the article ends on a note that really caught me off guard. It states that Vaporwave, as a concept, isn't fading away just because malls are closing down. In fact, it's only going to amplify in the era of artificial intelligence.
This raises an important question, maybe the most important question of this entire deep dive. Because if traditional Vaporwave is about humans mourning a human-made 1990s future that never came to pass, what exactly happens when AI begins generating massive, endless archives of flawless, synthesized nostalgia for a present day that never actually existed?
Oh, wow. So instead of human producers painstakingly remixing old commercials in Audacity, the AI is just generating perfectly accurate sounding 80s pop songs that were never recorded by artists who never lived.
Exactly. If we are already feeling synthetic nostalgia for the 1990s via chopped and screwed samples, what happens when we start feeling genuinely homesick for an entirely hallucinated reality generated by machines just seconds ago? Will our next lost future be entirely synthetic? It's a haunting thought, and it suggests that the tools of Vaporwave, the slowing down, the critical listening, the acute awareness of artificiality, might be the exact emotional tools we need to navigate the next decade of the internet.
That is a lot to chew on. From a mathematically slowed down 80s pop song to the psychological survival tools of the AI generation. To you listening, I want to say a huge thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It is a dense, beautiful topic. Next time you are walking through a quiet building or you hear some generic hold music on the phone, I hope you listen to the ambient hum of your surroundings just a little differently today. Let yourself feel the ghost in the machine. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.